Good evening. I'm Joshua Johnson. It's Wednesday, July 6th, and here's what we're talking about tonight. Prosecutors say the Highland Park mass shooter has confessed. We'll focus on his backstory, including the gun he bought legally despite previous threats of violence, and what his online history might have predicted about his alleged crimes. Supporters of Brittney Griner are rallying tonight in Phoenix, Arizona, demanding her release. President Biden spoke to Griner's wife today. What will become of the WNBA star and the other Americans in Russian custody? America is sorting out its patchwork of abortion laws after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Tonight, we'll focus on Wyoming. You'll meet the head of one clinic there that was recently set on fire. Also, the Russian siege continues in eastern Ukraine as its forces advance on the Donetsk region. We'll have a live report from Kyiv. And Britain's Prime Minister is fighting for his political life and refusing to resign. We'll explain why some members of Parliament laughed at him today.
Only in office, because no one else is prepared to debase themselves any longer. The charge of the lightweight brigade.
Well,
the Highland Park mass shooting still has a number of unanswered questions. Today, we learned the alleged shooter answered one of them. He has confessed to committing this attack. On top of that, police say 21-year-old Robert Crimo III drove to Madison, Wisconsin. Prosecutors say he thought about attacking again.
Investigators did develop some information that it appears when he drove to Madison, he was driving around. However, he did see a celebration that was occurring in Madison, and he seriously contemplated using the firearm he had in his vehicle to commit another shooting in Madison.
do you know how much ammunition he had at that point?
Approximately 60 rounds.
Police also confirmed that Crimo's father sponsored his application for a gun permit. Months before the application, relatives had called the police when the young man had threatened to, in his words, kill everyone. Meanwhile, victims of Monday's shooting are speaking out. Two young parade goers spoke to NBC's Dasha Burns.
So there was these guys in like the military holding up some flags, and they had rifles by their shoulders. So I thought, oh, that might just be that, until we started to run. And I did not really feel safe at first.
Like, I was like sort of shook that like it was gunshots. Like, I would never think it would happen here.
I'm still scared of like big noises, so like police sirens and stuff. But I feel much better that he was caught.
Caught, yes. But why did he do it? Police are still investigating that. And it's unclear so far why he did not attack Madison after all. But some are looking to his online history and its array of violent content. Let's begin tonight with Dr. James Allen Fox, a professor of criminology at Northeastern University. He has been studying mass shootings for more than 40 years. Professor Fox, welcome. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
First of all, can you just level set for us a little bit? I want to make sure that we don't try to diagnose him from a distance and make assumptions about why this happened based on what we think might be known from his online history. How much do we really know today in terms of the various digital breadcrumbs that mass shooters leave behind and the ideation, the causal relationship for the crimes they commit?
Well, you said causal relationship. I think the fascination with violence and what they put online is more of a symptom of their personality and their interest rather than a cause of it. It's very easy to blame things like violent television, violent video games for the actions of this person and other people, but I'm not sure that causal connection is that strong. What this does tell us, of course, is about his fascination with violence. But there are countless Americans who have similar fascinations and who put all sorts of ugly things online. And very, very few of them will ever commit a crime like this. That's why it's so impossible to predict this. Sure, in the aftermath, we see all the red flags that were missed, but that's with hindsight, which is 2020. Anticipating this and predicting it is impossible.
Thank you for level setting on that. I think with that said, I'd like to get a little bit more into what we do know and we have heard, at least from investigators, with the understanding that all of this is very preliminary. The shooter's digital footprint, some of the social media posts that have been reported on so far included tributes to mass shootings and public killings. One of his last posts on a message board was a video of a beheading. I think one of the things that has surprised a number of people, at least lately, is how easily this content can be found, that these are not necessarily hiding in dark corners of the web. Some of them are on other messaging apps and social media networks that are used for very innocuous stuff normally.
Well, social media allows people who are of like minds find each other and communicate with each other. If you go back decades, it would be very difficult to find someone who shared your interests. I mean, let's go back to the Columbine days, 1999. Those two, Klebold and Harris, they were of like minds, and they could enjoy and to talk about what they were going to do. Now, in the internet age, with all sorts of social platforms, it's easy to find other people who share your interests. Now, most of the people who are in these chat rooms are only fantasizing. They're not actually apt to do it. And the problem is, of the large number of people who may visit these sites and discuss mass shootings and maybe even admire the shooters, very few will actually follow in their footsteps.
Let me play you a cut from the Lake County Police as they're looking into the motive and assessing the shooter's possible obsessions. Take a listen to this, and then I'd like to get your thoughts on the other side. Listen.
His motivation isn't necessarily clear. I don't want to go specifically into what he told investigators. However, he had some type of affinity towards the number 4 and 7, and inverse was 7-4.
So some numerology coming into play there. They're one of the theories that has come about. And there are some clips of the shooter playing this game. Has to do with a video game called Hitman, where you play as a character named Agent 47. Now, I have played Hitman. Hitman is basically a puzzle game where you play as a hitman. If there's one thing that's key in the game, it's stealth. You're supposed to get in, do the job, and get out without being detected. So I'm just not sure how far we should go with some of these rabbit holes in terms of obsessions and fascinations. How do we think this through without seeing things that aren't there?
Well, you said you play it yourself, but I don't think that you're about to do anything other than play a game like that. And that's
exactly
the issue.
Yeah.
I mean, even when I mentioned Columbine, there was a role-playing game called Columbine RPG, and lots of people played it because they kind of were fascinated with mass shootings. Many people are, and sort of even fascinated with the power that's reflected in the shooter. There are people out there who identify with mass killers. They identify with the power. They all wish they had the nerve to do what they did. But fortunately, most don't have the nerve. They only dream about it.
I do want to be fair to investigators. There could well be a Venn diagram here, right? Between his playing of certain video games, certain ideology or ideation about numbers and fascinations with violence. We just don't know yet. The investigation's still playing out. For parents, perhaps, or loved ones who are suddenly thinking, oh my God, I think my niece, my nephew, my cousin plays Hitman, is looking forward to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 coming out, and now I don't know what to think. What is our best sense of how we use these clues to prevent these kinds of crimes? I don't want people seeing mass shooters where they aren't, but I don't want there to be any more mass shootings either. So what's our clearest path forward?
Well, a fascination, an obsession with violent games and websites and talking about mass murder can be a sign of a troubled individual, particularly a troubled adolescent. But there's a difference between being troubled and making trouble. Obviously, if you're concerned that your kid has issues, is bullied, and is fascinated with violence and guns and knives, well, a parent might want to get some help for that child. That doesn't mean that their child is apt to become a mass killer. The overwhelming probability is that they won't. So, yes, you can try to get them help. Maybe that will prevent something awful from happening. But then again, maybe it won't, because there are parents who, despite what they see or don't see in their child, are surprised and stunned when their child commits a mass shooting. We saw that in this particular case, for example, and many other cases where the parents really didn't have a clue.
I appreciate you saying that last piece of what you said, that there's a difference between being troubled and making trouble. And I think a little bit of inquiry, I'm not a parent, but I've found among a lot of young people who also game, like I do, that a little bit of inquiry about, like, what is it about this game that you love so much can go an extremely long way. Professor James Allen Fox of Northeastern University, appreciate you making time for us tonight, sir. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Still to come, a wild day at Westminster. Britain's Prime Minister is losing allies after a political scandal, but Boris Johnson says he positively will not resign. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Britain's Prime Minister is steadfastly refusing to resign despite a growing number of scandals. So far, at least 46 members of Boris Johnson's government have resigned themselves. Among them, at least 3 high-ranking members of his cabinet. They say they no longer have faith in his leadership. The latest scandal involved a political ally who resigned over sexual misconduct accusations. Today, the House of Commons held its regular question time for the Prime Minister. At various points, he was laughed at and booed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is a big day as we implement the biggest tax cut. For a decade.
Mr. Speaker, last week, a government minister was accused of sexually assaulting a young man. He knew the accused minister had previously committed predatory behaviour, but he promoted him to a position of power anyway.
It's absolutely true, Mr. Speaker, that it was raised with me. I greatly regret that he continued in office, and I've said that. I have said that before.
The power the disgraced government minister had was handed to him by that Prime Minister. And he's only in power because he's been propped up for months by a corrupted party defending the indefensible. Speaker, isn't this the first recorded case of the sinking ships fleeing the rats?
Mr. Speaker, the difference between this.
How many more ministers need to quit before he finally picks up his pen and writes his own resignation letter? Perhaps that's what he's doing now.
The job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
Statements today.
Bye, Boris.
Bye. Let's discuss all this with Ben Judah, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Mr. Judah, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for Americans here watching this from this side of the Atlantic, can you just explain a little bit about how this works? We went through the whole drama in the last few years with President Trump and the 25th Amendment and people losing confidence in him. This is not that kind of system. Having the Prime Minister resign and finding new leadership works in a very different way. Explain the political system that's at play around this scandal.
So this is a parliamentary system in which the leader of the country is appointed by Parliament, so who commands the most votes in Parliament, and it's the party in government that gets to decide who its leader is. So Boris Johnson's the leader of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party have a majority in Parliament, and what's happened is that a sort of avalanche of scandals and incompetence has meant that the party has lost confidence in him. The Conservatives want to remain in government, so they're not going to dissolve Parliament that would see an election and see people lose their seats. So it's really up to them now, as a party, their MPs, to get rid of their leader. So what typically happens in our system is that a critical mass of members of the cabinet, of kind of leading government figures, just start to resign, and the Prime Minister sees the writing on the wall and then resigns himself, and they don't force the party to get rid of them. Boris Johnson, who's always been a sort of carnivalesque figure of fun, and now a sort of pathetic sort of farting trombone on his way out, was never going to go quietly, and he is sticking in, refusing to resign in the normal manner. That doesn't mean there's a constitutional crisis. It just means that the Conservative Party itself has to get rid of him. And the Conservative Party will almost certainly get rid of him on Monday when their sort of chief executive meets to discuss changing their rules, and they'll change their rules, and then they'll have a vote, and he's gone.
What does this mean for everyday Britons who are dealing with pocketbook issues? I thought it was significant that the first two cabinet members who resigned in this latest huge wave of resignations were the Chancellor, who is responsible for kind of equivalent to the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and the Health Secretary. So the people involved in the economy and in COVID were two of the very first to say, we've lost confidence in your leadership. Now you've got Michael Gove, who is the secretary of this Leveling Up program, who has been fired by the Prime Minister after telling him in private, according to our colleagues at Sky News, that he needs to step down. What does this mean for everyday people on the street who still have the same array of issues to deal with today as they will whether he steps down or not?
So the reason that this is happening is that the Conservative Party now believes that the incompetence that has defined Boris Johnson's leadership is starting to hurt people in their pocketbooks bad enough that it means that they will likely lose the next election. Previously, they felt that Boris Johnson was an asset because he was very popular, and they were ready to put up with his sort of clownery and tomfoolery. No longer, because they think that the country's in a serious cost of living crisis, and if they're going to tackle it, they need somebody serious and professional who turns up in time, who reads his briefing boxes, and is just simply able to concentrate to be in charge of the country. And that's why the Chancellor and the Health Secretary began with these waves of resignations that have now become an avalanche.
Ben Judah of the Atlantic Council, appreciate you coming by to explain all of this to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now to Brittney Griner's trial in Russia. Right now, the WNBA team, the Phoenix Mercury, is hosting a Bring BG Home rally for their teammate. You can see one of the officials taking the podium now at the Footprint Center. That's the arena where the Mercury play. Today, the White House announced that both President Biden and Vice President Harris spoke to Mrs. Griner's wife, Sherelle. They told her they're working to secure Brittney Griner's release from Russian detention. The president also read her a draft of a letter that he is sending Mrs. Griner today. Tonight, Sherelle publicly thanked Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris on Instagram. She wrote in part, quote, "While I will remain concerned and outspoken until she is back home, I am hopeful in knowing that the president read my wife's letter and took the time to respond. I know BG will be able to find comfort in knowing she has not been forgotten," unquote. Let's dig into this story with Ambassador John Herbst. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Ambassador, welcome. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
How do you see this whole saga with Brittney Griner? Is this a geopolitical standoff? Is this kind of petty international politics? Is this a more serious issue? How do you see this?
Well, the U.S. government says she's been unfairly detained. So I suspect that means just what it says. And that Moscow saw her as an opportunity to create a problem for the Biden administration as they were preparing to greatly escalate their war on Ukraine. And I have no doubt the administration's been trying to get her out, but it's not such an easy thing to do. And certainly Moscow would demand in exchange us giving up people who are legitimately in jail in the United States, Russian citizens.
You said that she's being unfairly detained. What would it look like if she was unfairly detained? What are some of the things that have been missing from this process?
I am quoting the State Department. And if she were fairly detained, that would mean that they believe that there were legitimate reasons for Moscow's charges against her. So I think the department has concluded that the reasons are not legitimate. And of course, there is a history of such non-legitimate arrests in Russia for geopolitical advantage.
What about engaging with Russia diplomatically at a time like this? This cannot be helped, obviously, by the situation in Ukraine and the West kind of aligning with Ukraine and against Russia in all of this. What would you suspect the diplomatic picture looks like right now? I mean, are there still channels for the U.S. to even work with Russia on this right now?
Channels certainly do exist, and in fact, there was a prisoner exchange a few months ago for a youngish American Marine who'd been detained for well over a year in Russia. And I suspect the administration, I mean, I'm hearing the administration has in fact been in touch with the Russians about Ms. Griner as well as about Paul Whelan. But these are not easy things to resolve. Again, I don't have any doubt the administration is trying, but it's not easy. The fact that her teammates are raising the pressure publicly is probably a good thing. It's a reminder to Moscow that there can be other costs to such game playing.
Let's listen to a quick excerpt from Brittney Griner's coach, Vanessa Nygaard, speaking about this situation in terms of the coverage that it has gotten and the attention that it's gotten. Watch.
We get 4% of the media coverage, so BG's got 4% of the attention that she's needed in this situation. Whoever the athlete, a male athlete of equivalent status, of equivalent achievement of BG, an Olympian, the most dominant player in the WNBA. I'm sure that if it was a male athlete, it would be different basically on media coverage.
Ambassador, I wonder what you make of that in terms of who we're talking about and whether or not she herself, in terms of whether her celebrity is enough, for example, to get the kind of coverage that will make a difference. Worth noting that the brother of Paul Whelan, who is another American detainee who is being held in Russia, tweeted that no one from the Biden administration has approached her family yet. And our colleague Andrea Mitchell spoke to the Whelan family this evening. What about that aspect of this, the attention that it's gotten because of who she is?
Well, I agree with her coach that were she a male basketball player at the top of the profession, the way she's at the top of her profession, he would receive more attention. I do think, though, however, she has received a fair amount of attention, both publicity-wise as well as, of course, from the administration. And your point about Paul Whelan's family underscores that. But whether it's Whelan or whether it's Griner, again, these are difficult matters. And I mean, I worked in the State Department for 31 years. I worked in Moscow. I worked with the Russians. I know how hard these things are. So you may get a good result, but it always takes time and it takes effort. And you can't be certain of that good result.
Ambassador John Herbst, appreciate you talking us through this tonight. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We will get to more of tonight's top stories in a moment, including an update from Akron on the police-involved shooting of an unarmed black man, the latest on that 4th of July shooting in Philadelphia, and an update on the intensifying Russian assault in Ukraine. For the first time, President Biden has addressed the police-involved shooting of 25-year-old Jayland Walker in Akron, Ohio.
The Justice Department and Civil Rights Division of the FBI field office in Akron, Ohio, and the local U.S. Attorney's Office are closely monitoring and reviewing what happened. If the evidence reveals potential violations of federal criminal statutes, the Justice Department will take the appropriate action.
Today, Akron's mayor lifted a curfew that was imposed after the shooting. Yesterday, officers used tear gas on demonstrators outside the county jail. Police also say they have arrested more than 50 people since Sunday. The demonstrations began after the release of body cam footage showing officers shooting Walker dead. The shooting happened last Monday. Akron police say officers tried to pull Mr. Walker over for an alleged traffic violation. Police say he fired at them and led them on a high-speed chase. An attorney for the Walker family says he was fleeing from police when they shot at him. The attorney said he has not seen any evidence yet about allegations that Walker shot at the officers. Akron's police chief says Walker was not armed when officers shot him. A gun and bullet casing were later found back in the car. 8 officers involved in the shooting have been placed on administrative leave. Ohio's Attorney General's office is investigating the incident. We have an update on the 4th of July shooting in Philadelphia that injured 2 police officers. Police say the bullets came from the same weapon and possibly were fired from up to a mile away. But police still don't know who fired those shots or where they were fired from. The officers were said to be about 20 feet apart when they were hit, one in the shoulder, one in the forehead. Both officers are said to be in good spirits, recovering at home. Meanwhile, the fallout continues for Philly's mayor, Jim Kenney. He admitted that after the shooting, he was not looking forward to being mayor anymore. For saying that, Philadelphia Magazine gave him the Worst of Philly award. He has since apologized for those comments. Today, he blamed his remarks on being a bit frustrated and emotional that night.
Frustration over the fact that we are expected to solve a problem where all the tools to solve the problem have been systematically taken away by the legislature. And that's a frustration for me that we can't even pass our own legislation outlawing straw purchases. And despite what the progress that Congress has made, it's really not affecting us because it doesn't deal with semi-automatic handguns or ages where you can't buy a gun at a certain age. So I expressed, again, I'll answer this one more time. I was frustrated. I was angry.
Let's turn now to Ukraine, where Russian forces are entering a new phase in their offensive, aggressively moving into the Donetsk region of the Donbass. You see that there on the right side of the map. Authorities have reported heavy shelling there, specifically in and around the city of Sloviansk. That city's mayor is urging civilians to evacuate as the Russian assault on key Ukrainian cities continues. The UN is now estimating that 1/3 of Ukraine's population has been forced from their homes since the war began in February. NBC's Ali Arouzi joins us now from Kyiv with the latest. Ali, tell us more about the city of Sloviansk and why it's being targeted now.
Hey, Joshua. Well, all of Russia's focus is on Sloviansk because it is one of the major 3 cities in the Donetsk region. It's a place that they need to capture to really control the whole area, along with Kramatorsk and Bakhmut. Those 3 are the major cities, and like the Luhansk area where you saw Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, those twin cities, when they fell, the entire region fell into Russian hands, and this will be the same situation here in Donetsk, and that's why you're seeing a relentless shelling of that city, of Bakhmut and of Kramatorsk, day in, day out. The governor of the Donetsk region has told all 350,000 people that are left in that region to leave. That was a place that had about 1.6 million people. There are about 350,000 left. They're saying it's so dangerous for them because of the constant Russian shelling that they need to get out of there. Another reason they're telling them to get out of there is because the Ukrainians can't really launch a counter-offensive because of those civilians are trapped between the Russian and the Ukrainian shelling. So as the days and the weeks go by, I think it's going to become more and more intense there as the Russians try and keep one of their key goals in this war, which was to capture the entire Donbass, and that involves those cities we just mentioned.
We mentioned those new UN statistics that 1/3 of Ukraine's population has been displaced in this war. What are you hearing from authorities and from everyday people about how they're dealing with this displacement?
Well, I mean, it's a refugee crisis of epic proportions, the biggest we've seen since the Second World War. And they keep coming, as we've just mentioned. They're telling 350,000 people to get out of Donetsk. So it's getting worse and worse. And of course, there are very vulnerable people amongst them. And so many of their homes have been destroyed. We've seen some incredible statistics. 8 million, over 8 million people have had to flee the country. Over 7 million displaced within the country. The Ukrainian authorities say that over 800,000 homes have been destroyed and about 161 million square square feet of Ukrainian housing has been destroyed by Russian shelling. So those are unbelievable numbers, but there are also rescue efforts to try and get people out of these areas into safety. We spoke to one of the Ukrainian emergency services. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Everything was really very bad. The city was very destroyed. Infrastructure was destroyed. There were shellings from all sides. People were very scared. You have to understand that when people spend all the time in basement, they are going crazy. And some of them were almost crazy.
And he told us that most of the people he had gotten out of those regions were women and children. And of course, women and children represent the vast number of refugees in this country that have had to run away from their homes. And that represents a blind spot of vulnerable people that are susceptible to human traffickers and other criminal organizations. So not only have they had to get up and leave their houses, lose their houses in many cases, but they also fall prey to some of the most odious people on the planet. So it's a really desperate situation for all of these people, losing their homes and being in very dangerous circumstances once they have to leave, Joshua.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Before I have to let you go, Ali, it's been a while since you and I spoke, but how are things in Kyiv? Have things kind of calmed down in the capital lately? Are things still kind of tense and fluid there? How's the capital doing?
The capital is fairly calm. The air raid sirens go off, you know, sort of as they have been before. One just went off just before we came off on air with you. But there's been one attack here in the last sort of 3 weeks. So there is a sense of calm here, but people feel that that could be shattered at any moment. We're hearing, you know, the Russians are saying that, you know, they haven't taken their sights off Kyiv. If they are successful in capturing the Donbass, they're looking west, they're looking south. And obviously this would be one of the targets, but as we've seen before, it's a very hard city to capture. It's a city on a hill, so for now it remains safe, but that could change at any moment.
I appreciate you clarifying that even though we've been talking so much about the eastern parts of Ukraine, Sea of Azov, the Black Sea, city of Kyiv are still very much targets for the Russian military. Thank you, Ali. That's NBC's Ali Arouzi with the latest from Kyiv. Coming up, our deep dive on America after Roe v. Wade takes us to Wyoming. We'll meet the woman behind an abortion clinic that was attacked before it opened. Tonight, we continue our look at abortion state by state after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. 8 states have abortion bans in effect. A near total ban in Mississippi takes effect tomorrow. A judge has refused to block its trigger law. Reason being, Mississippi's law was the focus of the Supreme Court case that overturned Roe. And the clinic that fought that law, Jackson Women's Health, closed its doors today. Rulings on abortion bans are coming almost daily now. Supporters and providers of abortion services are figuring out what to do, and that, of course, depends on which state they're in. Let's focus now on Wyoming. Some providers there are finding themselves either without a clinic to practice in, or in some cases, the targets of violence. Joining us now is Julie Burkhart, the president and founder of Wellspring Health Access. That abortion clinic was set to open in Casper, Wyoming, but in May, an arsonist set it on fire before Roe was overturned, and that arsonist remains at large. Ms. Burkhart, welcome. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure.
Talk about some of the conversations that have gone on with you, with your colleagues, with the communities of women that you serve in the weeks since Roe was overturned. What's it been like in Wyoming lately?
Well, there have been a lot of moving parts, trying to figure out how we are best going to navigate forward and how we can find a path to continue to provide care to people and women in the state of Wyoming. There have been conversations about packing up and leaving or forging ahead and trying to ensure that this path is free and clear for people to access abortion in the state of Wyoming. And that's the path that we're on.
So you're leaning toward staying, and I'm also kind of curious in terms of how the laws in Wyoming maybe are changing and how that is affecting your decisions about what to do next.
Well, absolutely. In the state of Wyoming, currently, abortion is legal. We have had no word, no ruling that has come down from the state of Wyoming. And so we're waiting to see what lawmakers are going to be doing in the state. And so it's a wait and see game on that end. What we are doing is we are strategizing, and we are going to be using every tool in our toolbox, every resource that we have available to ensure that abortion is legal in the state.
With regard to the arson attack against your clinic, I wonder how you've dealt with just the atmosphere lately. Granted, attacks have been mercifully few and far between, but one is one too many. And I know that you've been involved in helping open abortion clinics in other states, Oklahoma, Kansas, and others. What about just the mood in the country right now and the potential for those kinds of threats?
Well, I think that all of us who work in this movement and who are providers, I think that we are all on high alert. I was incredibly saddened and dismayed that someone would break into our clinic, which was going to open in just 3 weeks after this arson happened. But very dismayed that someone would break in and take it upon themselves to commit this act of domestic terrorism. I, safely feel that I can say that providers across the country are on high alert. We are all concerned about violence, and all we are trying to do is provide health care to people in this country who have a right to health care. And it's just horrible to see that these acts of domestic terrorism continue to happen in this country.
The activists who have been advocating against abortion access for decades now have been, not surprisingly, delighted by the Supreme Court's ruling, and a number of them that we've spoken to here have said that now is time to turn a page, that it's time for there to be a different mentality, a different focus in the way that women are provided pregnancy counseling services that offer them more advocacy for adoption, for choosing to carry the baby to term, for other family planning options besides abortion, and that maybe there is another path forwards besides going back to providing more abortion services. Have you contemplated shifting your services, or what would you say to those advocates who say it's time to take a different approach?
Well, I would say that in the work that I have done over the last, dozen years in the other clinics that I have been in, that has been part of our model. We have offered not only abortion care, but family planning care, adoption services, and helping people find OBGYNs who might then help them continue with their pregnancy if they're wanting to go ahead and go to term. So those are, medical, part of our medical delivery services that we have provided and also intend to provide in Wyoming. It's not a matter of going in this other direction that you referenced. It's giving people the full access and spectrum so that that person can make a decision about their own body and whether it's time to have a child or not, and for us as healthcare providers to be there for those people across this country.
Julie Burkhart, president and founder of Wellspring Health Access. I appreciate you making time to tell us your story tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Some U.S. senators are calling TikTok a national security threat. And the FBI issued a unique warning about Chinese government espionage. We'll explain before we go. Two of the world's top intelligence leaders issued a rare public warning today. FBI Director Christopher Wray met his British counterpart, Ken McCallum, in London. Mr. McCallum is the Director General of the intelligence agency MI5. They issued a joint statement warning that China's large-scale hacking threatens governments and businesses worldwide, and that its spying is aimed at stealing the intellectual property of Western tech companies. They called this a, quote, game-changing challenge that needs to be acted on. Also, this week, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence posted a bulletin for state and local leaders. It warns of a different Chinese threat, efforts to influence policymaking. Joining us now are Kevin Cirilli, a visiting media fellow in the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub, and Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Gentlemen, good to have you both with us. And Kevin Cirilli, let me start with you. What do you think the significance is of the heads of the FBI and MI5 making this warning to the West together?
Massive. Look, 3 points that I would quickly make. First and foremost is that you heard from McCallum and Wray that the Chinese Communist Party is carefully watching how the West and NATO allies and strategic partners react to Russia's war with Ukraine. And they have actually taken steps in order to respond to potential sanctions that the West could levy against the Chinese Communist Party should they decide to invade an incredibly important democracy in that region and an incredibly important strategic partner to the United States, Taiwan. The second point here is that what you also heard was that MI5 and the FBI are increasingly ramping up their investigations into the Chinese Communist Party, something like sevenfold from 4 years ago in the UK, and a new investigation, according to the FBI director, every 12 hours. And then finally, the third and final point here is that this was a stark warning to the business community to assess their risk that they ascertain when choosing to take products into the Chinese market. For too long, according to Wray and McCallum, the United States and the West has figured that should the business go into China, that the Chinese Communist Party would adopt. You heard in plain speak from the Director General of MI5 saying that that was, quote unquote, plain wrong.
Jamil Jaffer, what are they expecting the West to do? I mean, it's not like Western economies are just going to pull out of China and stop doing business there altogether, although in the last few years, there have been some manufacturers who have pulled manufacturing back from China because they say it's easier to manage quality control stateside than it is to do it internationally with import-export rules. But Jamil Jaffer, I'm not sure what the response to this is supposed to be other than, yeah, we know.
Well, Joshua, I think there's a few things that you might think about U.S. Companies and government working together to do. One, we obviously need to harden our cyber defenses. We've seen a massive outflow of American intellectual property, research and development dollars, billions and billions of dollars that we invest here in the United States go out the back door to China, and they are able to leverage that to grow their economy on the backs of our R&D that they're stealing, the government is stealing, and then transferring to Chinese companies. We've known about this for years. The former director of NSA, General Keith Alexander, called it the greatest transfer of wealth in modern human history. Director Wray repeated that claim just a year ago. So we know this is a huge problem. So one, we got to harden our cyber defenses. We got to work together, government and industry together, companies with other companies, large with small, to defend our cyber infrastructure. Second, we have to go into the Chinese market knowing what the Chinese government intends to do, which is to extort our companies for intellectual property, force them to put their operations there. And we have to say to those companies, and those companies have to say to the Chinese government, we are not willing to invest and put money into your economy unless we're able to protect our intellectual property. That's at the core of our R&D. And our major companies need to make that choice now, ahead of time, before they're extorted on the front end of this.
Kevin, there was also that DNI warning about Chinese influence here in the U.S. Tell us a little bit more about that. It sounded like the concern, and I don't want to get too, like, spy movie Manchurian Candidate about all of this, but it sounded like the concern is that there might be Chinese government influence on lawmakers at various levels in the U.S. to put pressure on them to advance policies that will be advantageous to China. Is that hyperbole, or is that what the warning is?
No, you're spot on, Joshua. I mean, when the U.S. National Counterintelligence and Security Center comes out with a bulletin today warning about how the Chinese Communist Party is looking to forge relationships with cities in the United States, with local municipalities, with local school districts and small businesses, and I would echo Jamil Jaffer right now, because that is what they're doing. They're sensing that Washington, D.C., where I am, is united on this. This is actually the one area, mind you, where there's bipartisanship here in Washington, D.C., for the most part, in terms of how to deal with the growing threat of the Chinese Communist Party. And so when the top Democrat and Republican of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner of Virginia and Marco Rubio of Florida, respectively, come out and warn against the ByteDance's TikTok. ByteDance is the Chinese-backed company which owns TikTok, and the impact that that has in terms of data collection on not just Americans, but specifically young people in the United States. And they're now calling on the FTC to launch an investigation. Look, this is an incredibly partisan time in Washington, D.C., but that is a perfect illustration of bipartisanship in looking to counter and to look into what's going on with the apps and high-tech innovation coming from China.
Jamil, I wonder, with regard to TikTok specifically, that's been getting a lot more attention lately in terms of exactly what Kevin mentioned, concerns about the company having way too much access to U.S. users' data. I feel like because of everything related to technology today, we've kind of had to make this uneasy peace with the idea that Mark Zuckerberg wants more of our data than we might want to share, and that Jeff Bezos may know a little bit too much about every move we make and know exactly how to market products to us. I feel like we've kind of accepted that as a reality of being alive in 2022. So how do we deal with something like TikTok, especially since a lot of the users are young adults who, forgive me for saying this, young adults, don't necessarily always make the best decisions about where they put their data and the things they post online? Like, what do we do?
Well, it's really true. I think the thing that people have to realize about TikTok and about the potential data collection is it's not just data or videos of you dancing and talking to your friends and the like. It's about the information that's being collected there. Who are you talking to? Where are your network? Who are your friends? How often do you communicate with them? And the Chinese government is not just combining the data it gets from TikTok, but it's combined that data with data that it's stolen from Anthem, the healthcare provider, from various U.S. credit card companies, from the U.S. government, the largest database we have of all of our cleared individuals, the OPM database. It can combine all that data and find cross-references, and then, and this is the key, Joshua, it can train machine learning algorithms on some amount of data. You know, there's this old saw that data is the new oil. Well, guess what? The Chinese have a tremendous amount of it. They're gathering more today. TikTok is a key source for that data, and they can combine that and run very sophisticated human intelligence and other operations against our people in the long run. This isn't a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. This is a 20, 30-year plan with a horizon, looking at our young people, identifying their relationship, their connections, and that's the real threat that comes from what might seem like otherwise innocuous data collection, completely unlike what Facebook, Google, or other companies might do. Whatever concerns you about that, think about the Chinese government having all this other data, combining it, and using AI to identify what you might do next.
Before I have to let y'all go, Kevin, where do we go from here? I can just imagine parents hearing this like, oh, great, now I have to rip TikTok out of my kid's hand too. Thanks, Josh. Like, there's no way that's going to happen. Where does this go from here before we go?
I was joking with my folks back outside of Philly where I grew up that, you know, when I was younger, we would watch music videos after school. And now you've got to worry about Communist Party of China putting apps on our young people's phones. Where do we go from here? Right. We go in terms of coalition building. And I think what I was struck by in terms of over the last couple of weeks when I talked to my sources in the intelligence community and up on Capitol Hill is, can there be an Indo-Pacific trade partnership that includes technology? Can there be a partnership between the U.S. and Taiwan, a trade partnership, a new trade deal, a new trade agreement that includes high-tech innovation? And I think it's incredibly important when you have two countries joining NATO that alliance holds so that China doesn't invade Taiwan.
Kevin Cirilli, Jamil Jaffer, I know there are no easy solutions to any of this, but we appreciate you talking it through with us tonight. Thank you both very much. And hey, thank you for making time for us as well. Remember, you can send us your thoughts and questions on any of the topics we discussed tonight. If you're comfortable with social media, we are at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and yes, even TikTok. Of course, you can reach out the old-fashioned way with a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622. And yes, we do have strict data policies. We are not storing your data. Or you can email us now tonight at nbcnews.com. Don't believe me? nbcuniversal.com/privacy. Read it for yourself. I'm Joshua Johnson. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.